the Khalistanis seem to have received a silent support from the Canadian government and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau himself. The latest provocation has been the threatening posters with photographs and names of top Indian diplomats circulating on the social media. The posters are an open call to attack and kill the Indian diplomats in Canada, USA, UK as well as Australia. While USA, Australia, UK have condemned these posters and opened investigations by law enforcement agencies, the Canadian Prime Minister, however, Justin Trudeau, has brazened it out by supporting and defending Khalistani terror propaganda as freedom of expression. Khalistanis are now inching closer to attack the Indian missions abroad on July 8th without any fear of the law of the land. In India's interest, we ask today on News9 Live, is glorifying assassination of former Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi freedom of expression? Is shielding Khalistani terrorists upholding Constitution of Canada? And finally, we ask here on News9 Live, is the open call to kill Indian diplomats by Khalistanis who are Canadian citizens a freedom of speech? We will be discussing this with a host of guests who are joining us on the debate today. But before we go to them, let's listen in to some of the reactions that we are picking up on this big story.
Minister, we've seen a parade float depict the assassination of Indira Gandhi and posters calling on people to kill India. The Indian government says you're being soft on Sikh extremism because you rely on votes from that community. How can you demonstrate to them that they're wrong?
They are wrong. Canada has always taken extremely seriously violence and threats of violence. We've always taken serious action against terrorism, and we always will. We have an extremely diverse country, and freedom of expression is something that we have, but we will always make sure that we are pushing back against violence and extremism in all its forms.
I think San Francisco case is being investigated. They will find out as to who was it. And this person who took out the flag, there, I think he was the one who recently died of cancer also. So how can you allow India's flag being taken down? Police must have been there, the so-called Scotland Yard people, just watching helplessly. I can't imagine this thing happening in India. I don't think any Indian government will allow such a thing to happen in front of the British High Commission, or you can say US Embassy. Nothing can happen this way. They have already registered a strong protest, and let us see what the reaction of how long they can continue with this nonsense. If they allow such a thing to happen, you have to raise the level of protest also. It has consequences. I don't think they'd like to spoil relations with India at this very crucial juncture when they need India. It is actually made to look bigger than the normal. These people don't have that much of following. Maybe social media, everything they're projecting. Some cases are there, but they don't have the number or a following there at all. One must understand, a small minority cannot hijack the agenda of the larger population, pro-India population. They cannot, but we should understand that there are people of Indian origin, Sikhs there, who are also suffering because of their actions. They are getting maligned. Here we should understand that we have to strengthen the hands of the large majority of moderate Sikhs. Maybe 98–99%. They are afraid of these people also. They look here, if we stand up, they will kill them also. But when they stand up with some sort of a support that Government of India has appointed a truth commission, this is what is coming out, then they can sacrifice their lives also in standing in front of them.
What the current round of violence tells us is that it was always this way. It was always this way that the Khalistan movement, just as Canada is too close and too tolerant to the Khalistan movement, the Khalistanis themselves have been too close to organized crime. We are not paying attention, close enough attention, to the intersection of the Khalistan movement and organized crime.
And you heard the reactions there of prominent people from the India security establishment, Canadian prominent people, as well as several other voices as well. The most important voice here is of Justin Trudeau. And the guests joining us today on the show are Abhijit Iyer Mitra from the Institute of Peace and Conflict Studies, Snehesh Alex Phillip, Deputy Editor for The Print. But before that, let's go live to Canada, where joining us is prominent author and journalist Terry Miliski. Mr. Miliski, we've interviewed you before, but today it's different. There's a new wave of Khalistani propaganda. We've seen this before, but it seems that it is taking a very violent color, not just in Canada, but in USA, Australia and UK as well. But sitting in Canada and monitoring the Khalistani propaganda for decades together, how do you see the latest development? And most importantly, why is the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau so soft on these Khalistanis?
Well, I think what we're watching now is an inflection point where they've pushed their luck. They've noticed that they got away with it. This is a part of the long history of the Khalistan movement in Canada, where they try something to see if they'll get away with it. Maybe they'll put a picture of the Air India bomber, Talvinder Parmar, on a parade float on Vaisakhi Day. Let's see if we get away with that. Anyone say anything? No, we got away with it. Next year, now we're going to put a really big life-size poster of Parmar on the outside wall of the Gurdwara. Now, fast forward to today, what have we seen in recent weeks? We've seen in Brampton, you mentioned it, I believe, the obscene display of a celebration of the assassination of Indira Gandhi in 1984 on a float going through the streets of Toronto with lots of blood. Oh, they thought they would put some extra ketchup on her sari to make it look really bloody. Well, that's a nice sight for kids. Teaching kids, of course, that this was a great thing. We should rejoice at this assassination. Now, they got away with that. There was an absence of commentary from Canadian leadership. So now what's the next step? Now they're threatening death. There's no way other way to paint these latest posters that you've mentioned that have been going up all over in the UK, in the US, in Canada, and in Australia, openly inciting violence against Indian diplomats whose faces and names are helpfully portrayed on the posters. So these are the killers who are wiping out our people. It is complete baloney. It's absolute nonsense. There's not a shred of evidence of any Indian involvement in the recent death, for example, of Bhai Shahid Hardeep Nijjar in Surrey, British Columbia. But this is the next step in the escalation, this constant escalation of pushing their luck to see what they can get away with, and they're having a great time realizing that the politicians here in Canada are not saying anything. They can get away with pretty much anything. We're about to find out. Now, the other question that you asked was, why is the Canadian government so soft? Why don't they do more? Why don't they respond? Well, I think some of your viewers already know the answer to that. And that is vote bank politics. We know that the present government is Justin Trudeau's government is a minority government, which is sustained by the votes of the left-wing NDP party, led by Jagmeet Singh, who is clearly a Khalistani sympathizer. I don't think that the Prime Minister wants to precipitate an election by driving the NDP out of this coalition. There is that, but also it's just plain ignorance. It may not be all a plot, is what I'm saying.
Mr. Miliski, if I can come in here and ask you
because of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Miliski, I want to ask you that doesn't he realize, Justin Trudeau, that there are national security consequences of the call that he has taken? He's saying that under the garb of freedom of expression, the Kill India posters, the posters that are targeting Indian diplomats, are allowed. There will be no action whatsoever. RCMP or any other national security agency will not act against these Khalistanis. And you've seen, Mr. Miliski, very closely the kind of gangs that have come in, in Canada. There are gang wars that are happening. The Khalistanis are increasingly turning violent. The Indian diaspora is feeling intimidated and threatened. And there is no assurance from the government or the local law enforcement that they will protect them. So don't they realize the national security consequences that today they are supporting terrorism, but tomorrow the same terrorism can set afire their backyard?
They think it's not going to burn them. They don't think that the snake in the backyard is going to bite them. And let it be said that they've got away with it for years and years and years, but then it blows up. This was what it was like in the early 80s. I'm old enough to remember what it was like when there was this high emotion in the streets. People were beaten and killed in the streets of Canada. Now, the same kind of high-level emotion is not just happening to occur, it's being propelled, it's being encouraged by the Khalistani leadership, which is trying to see how much they can get away with it. Now, Trudeau, in his comments on these latest provocations, the posters, most significantly, he did not seem to have been properly briefed. He didn't seem to be quite aware. He hadn't picked up on the fact that, hello, this is a critical moment. This is something which is causing India, and we need India more than India needs Canada, is furious about this. People are incensed in India. Hello, why aren't you smelling the coffee? And this answer that he gave about how, oh, well, we've always fought really hard against, we've done a great job of tackling terrorism. Hello? I mean, I think many Indians know better than the Prime Minister, apparently, what an absolutely terrible job Canada has done traditionally in fighting terrorism, particularly the worst terrorism we have faced ever, the explosion, the bombing of the Kanishka, the Air India bombing of 1985, where we were following the culprits around for months. We were wiretapping their phones. We had them under surveillance for 3 months before the bombing and still didn't do anything. And then after the bombing, failed again to provide the victims' families with a due measure of justice, in my opinion. So Canada's record is not at all something to brag about. And for any Prime Minister to look at the official reports commissioned by the Government of Canada saying that Canada completely botched that file, and then have Prime Minister step up and say, oh, we've always fought strenuous, we've been great. We've done a terrific job. No, we haven't. And it's not getting better. And it needs to get better real soon.
Mr. Miliski, if I can come to you quickly before I go to Snehesh and Abhijit, a very quick answer from you. We recently interviewed GBS Sidhu, who was a Special Secretary of Cabinet Secretariat in India, RNAW, another voice that has tracked Khalistan very closely. And he said during the course of the interview that, Canada, countries like Canada are using the Khalistan propaganda as a stick against India to manipulate India into their own demands. It could be trade, it could be security, it could be any other strategic reason. But do you think this stick is certainly going to work in the long run for Canada?
I've read GBS Sidhu's book. I think it's a fine book, and I congratulate him. However, I disagree on this point. I think that it's almost giving Canada too much credit for a Machiavellian geopolitical plan. They don't have a plan. They just want to get elected next time out, and they don't want to antagonize the voters upon whom they depend. Right now, they've got the Khalistani vote locked up. And remember that Canadian elections often turn on these very ridings, these very electoral districts with high Punjabi population in Brampton, in Ontario, and in British Columbia, notably in Surrey. So I don't think that the Canadian government is wielding the Khalistanis as a stick. They're not that clever. They're just letting life happen without saying, hold it, hold it. Now they've gone too far. We're going to take action. We're going to take the risk of being a leader, and we're going to denounce these activities and start cracking down on these people.
Mr. Miliski, thank you so much for joining us live from Ontario in Canada. We really appreciate you coming so early in the morning for this live broadcast in India, and we'll turn to you for your expert advice in future as well. Now let's go live across to Snehesh Alex Philip and Abhijit Iyer Mitra, two important voices in India that have been tracking the Khalistan propaganda as well. Snehesh, if I can come to you, how do you make of this latest development? We've seen this time and again over the last many years, but of course, bringing down the Indian tricolour, and then we see the same.
Terry really spoke about. He really went ahead and told us about how the Khalistanis actually started, doing what they did. They tried something first with a small poster, then they put out those large posters, saying that they were getting away with everything, and this is where it has come down to. As far as the Canadian PM is concerned, he says this is freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I completely in support of freedom of speech, freedom of expression. But freedom of speech and expression is about being vocal, criticizing, let's say, a government for that matter. You're more than free to criticize the government's policy. But when you put out posters of Kill India, and you put out posters of Indian diplomats with their names and their faces, not just in Canada, but in other countries too. And then that is not freedom of expression. That is an open threat, an open call for murder. Now, this is something that needs to be really tackled, and the Canadians or the Americans or the Brits or the Australians cannot get away by just saying that this is part of freedom of expression. Sorry, freedom of expression. This is not freedom of expression. This is actually a conspiracy for murder. This is a public call for murder. Aditya.
All right, Snehesh, I request you if you could stay on for a few more minutes. Abhijit, coming to you. We've debated this earlier as well for years when the Kartarpur really happened, and how Pakistan has been exploiting the Khalistanis for a very long time. But what's your reaction to Justin Trudeau? And I have a two-part question to you. First, how do you react to Justin Trudeau's latest statement saying that we have freedom of expression, as if we don't? Under the garb of freedom of expression, giving an open, long rope to these Khalistanis. And secondly, in the last many months, you've seen these killings happening in Pakistan, in UK, in Canada of Khalistanis. Who really is behind this?
Well, let me answer the second part of the question first and just say I don't know who's behind it. I don't even want to speculate who's behind it. I'm sure a lot of people will see, 10-dimensional chess and God knows what not there, but I honestly don't know. I just want to draw your attention to two things. First is this. This is a news item from October 31st, 2020, where Justin Trudeau defended free speech on Friday, but added that it was not without limits and should not be arbitrarily used to hurt the feelings of certain communities. Now, this man seems to have come a very long distance in 3 years, where he goes in 2020 and says free speech is not a license to hurt the feelings of communities, to 2023, where he believes calls to kill India, to kill our diplomats in Canada, and to glorify the killing of Indira Gandhi are freedom of expression. Right, number one. Number two, I think the problem goes a lot deeper than Jagmeet and NDP. After Stephen Harper, the former Prime Minister Stephen Harper, the Conservative Prime Minister, had a somewhat disastrous visit to India, where he got boycotted for certain things because of Khalistan. He created a focus team of India experts around him who told him exactly what was happening, and he used to be very well briefed and prepared on it since then. The problem with Justin Trudeau is, more than the NDP, you've had elements of his own party being captured by Khalistani extremists. We saw the primaries. I would urge the audience to go Google the primaries that happened in 2015 in the election that brought him to power. You literally had moderate Sikh candidates, especially in Brampton, Ontario and BC, the areas that Terry referred to, who were physically ejected from the primaries. They were physically caught by the scruffs of their neck, lifted up and thrown out, where extremist Khalistani candidates proceeded to win based on the promise that they would deliver votes to Justin Trudeau. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police were standing outside and they did nothing. Why? Because they believe that, for white people to get to interfere in quote unquote community affairs is racist. So Justin Trudeau, in fact, owes his position even within the party to an extremist Khalistani takeover of certain parts of the party, areas where Sikhs are very important in the system. The third is the issue that a lot of Sikh friends of mine in Canada feel completely trapped in this. When I lived in Melbourne, when the LTT was still a thing, I was told not to speak Tamil in public. I was told not to go to Tamil stores in public except as a curiosity and pretend to be a Punjabi. Because apparently speaking Tamil, and in fact, the people who occupied the house before me there ran away because of that, because the LTT would come if they found out you were Tamil, extort you for money, claim they would go after your family back in India or Sri Lanka, wherever. The problem is moderate Sikhs out there, and the vast majority of them in Canada are moderate, are today in the grasp of this kind of extortionist terror politics that happens out there. My problem with Justin Trudeau is not that he's unwilling to help India. That's fine. I mean, he's got his own interest calculations. He is unwilling to help Canadian citizens. He is unwilling to help Sikhs of Canadian descent who feel they've been completely extorted, blackmailed, and held hostage by Khalistani extremists.
Right.
He is somebody who is willing to ride to power on the basis of blatant illegality and Khalistani thuggery. And this is a man who has always been a very crass and base player of identity politics. So, to answer your first question last, Aditya, when you tell me how do I react to Justin Trudeau, it's this. My eye rolls, because literally nothing about Justin Trudeau is not cringeworthy. This man is walking, talking cringe. You remember his own, and he's fantastic at deflecting blame. You remember his blackface. His blackface wasn't him. It was society that had insensitized him to it to become a racist. When he comes to India, it wasn't him that botched up his entire visit by cultural appropriation and dancing to Bhangra and wearing Indian clothes. His NSA then goes back and gives a press conference saying the Indian government went out of their way to, destroy that visit. During the farmers' protests, he got involved in something saying you have to respect their freedom of expression and speech. And look what he did to his own truckers' protests. This man is a dangerous, two-faced hypocrite. He is bad for India, but he's far, far worse for Canada. Canada's voted for him, and I wish him on the Canadians. The Canadians deserve Justin Trudeau, and Justin Trudeau deserves Canada.
Well, Justin Trudeau's hypocrisy is certainly visible to all, not just in India, but in Canada as well. But Snehesh, if I can quickly come to you, how do you see Indian government's reaction? Do you see it as the maximum that they can do? They have summoned the Canadian envoy. The matter has been taken up in Canada as well by the Indian diplomats. A démarche has been issued. But do you think more can be done? Because when I was interacting with GBS Sidhu, the former Special Secretary of RNAW, he said after the killing of Indira Gandhi, India put pressure on UK, and the UK High Commission was forced to send a letter to the Foreign Office in London saying that if you continue with the propaganda of rallies in London in support of the Indira Gandhi killing, then the bilateral trade and the bilateral ties will suffer. Do you think India can do more with Canada?
See, India can definitely do more when it comes to Canada, but the problem here is that I think there has to be a sustained campaign around this, and the Canadians have to, and the Indian diplomats have taken up this issue. They've taken it in the strongest manner possible, but the problem is that this is not, and then things go back to normal. I think this has to be a key parlays that we have in these countries. Approach as far as this whole Khalistan movement is concerned. It's making a statement here and there, issuing a démarche is fine, but this has to be, as I said earlier, this has to be part of it has to be an integral part of our diplomatic parlays between these countries, and these countries need to be told and made it absolutely clear that we cannot tolerate such blatant disregard to this open support to terrorism and the killing and calls for killing of Indian diplomats, Aditya.
Snehesh, quickly, if I can ask you, since you track Pakistan also very closely, and we've been, researching and investigating and reporting about the K2 strategy of Pakistan for years together, how much of a Pakistani angle do you see in this new wave of the Khalistan that we've seen, even before the Kartarpur really was formed, continuously, be it from Pannu sitting in America, be it from Paramjit Pamma sitting in UK, or similar elements in Canada, Australia?
there is no doubt about the fact that these Khalistani movements are supported by Pakistan. They are the ones who gave them the safe houses. They are the ones who help them organize things. They are the ones who help them with all kinds of support that they need. Be it Panu, be it Pama, be it anyone. All of them have found safe havens in Pakistan, and they continue to receive the help from the ISI. So, if there is, and that's why I said, we cannot allow, and that's why I said in the beginning that this is the call for killing of Indian diplomats, for violence against Indian diplomats by these people who are funded and backed by the ISI cannot be tolerated and cannot be equated as freedom of expression. And I'm so glad that he really brought up the fact that Trudeau had earlier, in his earlier avatar, had said that freedom of expression has some limits. It comes with limits. Here, I'm telling you, here it is absolutely clear. This is not about freedom of expression. This is actually about call for violence. This is actually about coming together for conspiracy of murder. If tomorrow anything happens to any Indian diplomat, the Canadian government would be responsible for it, for not taking action against these ISI-backed organizations.
Thank you very much, Snehesh. Abhijit, if I can come to you now, you heard of this character, Gurupatwant Singh Pannu, who makes these videos time and again, and it's basically a mockery, really. When news spread 2 days back that he had been he had died in an accident, perhaps that was a fake news. There were celebrations all across, but also people said that he was good fun, and there was these comedy videos that used to come time and again. But who is behind Gurupatwant Singh Pannu? He seems to be a one-man army. I remember about 3 years back, two of my journalist colleagues got a threat saying that please teach Aditya Raj Kaul that if he doesn't mend his ways, there will be consequences. And Delhi police immediately recommended security for me. But I told the police that he is hardly a threat. So what do you make of this character? Who is behind him?
Just two things. First, I'm going to add on to what Snehesh said. You remember in the 80s when Khalistan was raging, it was the Pakistanis paying Khalistanis to create trouble in Punjab. Today, that equation has changed. Today, the hostage Sikh community in both the UK and Canada are extremely affluent. And Pakistan today is a beggar state. In those days, Pakistan used to be economically better off than us. So today, what you see happening is it is Khalistanis paying the ISI and paying Pakistanis. We've been tracking this movement, this money flow in Canada for almost 7-8 years now. We've seen money flows from them to the Pakistanis, and what they tell the Pakistanis is, you do the dying, we'll do the funding. The situation is reversed. Number one. Number two, Gurupatwant Singh Pannu, I don't think if he is ever killed, it will not be by any Indian agency or any friend of India. Gurupatwant Pannu is a friend of India. He constantly shows up the Khalistani movement for the sad, pathetic joke that it is. So, I think he's a raw or IB asset for sure. And I think, if anything, his Khalistani brothers who thought he was one of them might have woken up to the fact and might have decided to do away with him. The answer lies within the Khalistani community, not with India. There is no right-thinking Indian who would wish any kind of ill on this kind, noble and generous gentleman.
But Abhijit, before I let you go, a final question. What do you see as the future of Khalistan? In India, there's no support in Punjab, so as to say. I've spoken to people from different ideologies, and they say they don't believe in this Khalistan. But what is the future? And secondly, what is the Indian government going to do about it? Even if it's overground and it is only abroad, certainly there would be more steps that would be required.
I think what you'll see is a very Tibet minus kind of solution. See, the thing about the Tibetan leadership was, and probably still, it has a certain moral grounding and standing. The Khalistan movement has no moral grounding and standing because the faces of these movements are thugs, and they win political power through thuggery. It is certainly not a sense of, moral justice or anything like that. The only worth of these people is the sort of vote bank that they can consistently deliver. They're concentrated in urban areas, in middle, low income-ish neighborhoods, and they're very good at bringing out their folks to vote for a certain party in a certain place. Other than that, they have no value. Khalistan has a dimmer future than, say, Tibet. Tibet might actually become independent someday, but Khalistan is simply never going to be. I think these people realize that. I think this has become very much a sort of a money laundering device. These days, activism of any kind gets you money, it gets you visibility, it gets you political access. And this is just one thing that I won't call them elites, but let's just call them the thug lords of the Khalistani community have decided to latch on to increase their political access and their access to financial opportunities.
All right, Abhijit, thank you so much for joining us today, and I hope to see you more often debating national security and strategic affairs here on News9 Live. Thank you very much. And that's all from me, Aditya Raj Kaul, on In India's Interest. But before we let you go, here is an important documentary by News9 Plus, The Khalistan Reborn, the Canada Connection, indicating what's the reality of the Khalistani terror propaganda in Canada. Keep watching. Thanks a lot. On 20th March 2023, a mob of Khalistan supporters vandalized the Indian High Commission in London. A day later, the Indian consulate in San Francisco was attacked. Another plan to incite violence at the Indian embassy in Washington, D.C. was foiled by the secret services. The attacks exposed the resurgence of the Khalistan movement.
The last time we saw that was in the 1980s, and that led to the worst ever incident of terrorism in Canadian history.
Hi, my name's Terry Malewski, and I was one of the reporters that was sent in 1985 to cover the bombing of Air India Flight 182. And I've been covering that story in many ways ever since for 37 years, and wrote a book about the Khalistan movement called Blood for Blood. And I'm still talking about it. It won't go away.
My name is Anil Bhattacharya. I've seen it evolve and grow in strength, which really didn't exist on the ground about 10 years back.
Over the years, for the Sikh community that is in Punjab, India, Canada has become a second home. And in the last 3 to 4 decades, their population has significantly increased. And this has led to a massive demographic change and a change in perception and narrative in support of the Khalistani elements from the political leadership of Canada. Be it the ruling government or the opposition, they tend to have a separatist tendency as well, a support system for the Khalistani radical propaganda.
This year has been a record year in terms of gangland killings in Canada. Some of that is definitely attributable to gangs operating, Indo-Canadian gangs operating, who would have links to a degree with the Khalistan movement. There is a growing degree of concern within Canadian law enforcement that these transnational gangs are in the future going to cause problems in Canada.
There's no question that the problem of the Khalistani movement and its relationship with organized crime that's where the rubber hits the road. To me, what the current round of violence tells us is that it was always this way. It was always this way that the Khalistan movement, just as Canada is too close and too tolerant to the Khalistan movement, the Khalistanis themselves have been too close to organized crime. We are not paying attention, close enough attention to the intersection of the Khalistan movement and organized crime.
They are immune from Indian law. They know that they cannot be extradited. Even if extradition proceedings start against them, that process can take up to a decade. What both Indian and Canadian officials are really concerned about is the sort of growing nexus between the Khalistani groups and these gang members, and what it's going to lead to. The last time we saw that was in the 1980s, at the height of the Khalistan movement in India. And that led to the worst ever incident of terrorism in Canadian history, which was the bombing of the Air India flight Kanishka. Now, in terms of support from state actors, I mean, we are very aware that Pakistan, through its High Commission and through its consulates in Canada, does tend to play a significant role in the organization of the Khalistani groups there, including funding. There was a Consul General of Pakistan in Toronto who was actually asked by the Canadian government to leave the country because he was playing a role in fomenting both Islamist terrorism as well as Khalistani groups in the area. Now, in terms of where we are with the Khalistan movement in Canada,
the Indian government have issued a notice to the more than 3.5 million Sikh community that they should leave their homes and move back from the border villages.
Sikhs for Justice, of course, is headquartered out of New York, but it does have a fairly significant following in Canada, including Hardeep Nijjar, who's based in Vancouver, in Surrey, British Columbia. Then you have other groups like Shiromani Akali Dal, Amritsar, which is Simranjeet Singh Man's group, which has a role to play there as well. They are overtly pro-Khalistan. They don't hide it. They don't make any bones about it. Sikhs for Justice campaign for the referendum was gaining traction in Canada.
People are free to vote, and this is a plain vanilla type of separatism. They're not asking for a vote on an armed insurgency, but just for the principle of an independent state called Khalistan.
So they have, I think, another 4 or 5 more votes over a period of time, which will be held in other Canadian cities. You'll have them in Vancouver, you'll have in Calgary, Montreal, Ottawa, etc.
What's going to result from that? It could be the end of the road, because what may result from that is a pitifully low level of support. Remember that the Khalistan movement has never been about democracy. Nobody elected the Baba Khalsa. Nobody elected Tawhind Parmar to go out and blow up a civilian airliner and try to blow up 2 of them. This was never about the popular will.
K2 is a term that has been coined by the Pakistani ISI. So the K2 basically means Kashmir and Khalistan. So on these two ends, Pakistan continuously wants to instigate violence. It wanted to, in fact, initiate the Khalistani propaganda, revive Khalistan somehow. Just the way we've seen terrorism in Kashmir, they wanted homegrown terror in Punjab, where Sikh community is pitted against the Hindus and others in India, and there's continuous violence.
There's no question that it's a real project. Their plan was to make things hurt, make things bleed in India, make India bleed and feel the pain that Pakistan felt in 1971. I've mentioned a couple of times Talvinder Parmar, the Air India bomber. When he died in October of 1992 in a hail of gunfire in the village of Kang Arayan, he was not alone. He was in a heavily armed group of 6 men, of which he was only one, and 2 of the others were ISI agents, whose identities were confirmed, by the way, by the Pakistani government at the time. They were very well equipped, and it was very revealing that in death, Talvinder Parmar, the Air India bomber, was accompanied by 2 Pakistani agents.
Well, security situation in Punjab is worsening. It is at the stage, at a brink, where if there isn't any action or a cohesive strategy by the Punjab government, it would go out of hands. We have seen the Pakistan ISI directly recruiting gangsters in Punjab as well as part of this K2 strategy. We've seen for years together drug trafficking being used by Pakistan to fund terror in Punjab. There have been, these lone wolf attacks that have happened. There have been small-scale bomb blasts that have happened in the Ludhiana court premises. We've seen RPG attacks on the intelligence headquarters of the Punjab police as well, and similar such actions.
Understand the political vacuum in Punjab today. No traditional party, which is essentially the Akalis and the Congress, has now any space after the last election. You have a complete novice, the Aam Aadmi Party, which has no roots in the communities. It has ridden a wave, essentially, surfed over a wave of anti-Congress and anti-Akali sentiment. But it has no roots down there. These people, who are essentially outsiders to the political process, have no understanding also of administration.
We see indecisiveness by the local government, the Bhagwant Mann-led Aam Aadmi Party government in Punjab, because they came to power on a plank of change. They wanted to change the governance system, end corruption, target drug trafficking, and also Khalistani elements. But in the last 1 year, we haven't seen any kind of a decisive action which sets a precedent in Punjab. We've seen, in fact, the government surrendering to the diktats of the Khalistani elements.
So agriculture has become extremely unprofitable. Industry hasn't grown. Governments have stagnated. Today, the crisis of governance in Punjab is such that many a month they have difficulty even paying their salaries to government servants. On top of that, you have significant crises. You have an estimated, I think, 20 million unemployed youth in Punjab. You have an environment and an atmosphere of corruption and mistrust. The youth is looking for outlets. Whether that outlet comes in the form of a secular Kisan agitation, or then that having dissipated, you will find the same people have gravitated towards, or at least some of the same people will have gravitated towards Amritpal Singh.
One major development that happened recently was the rise of Amritpal Singh. He has these gun-wielding men around with the tag of AKF, and he is supporting the Khalistani propaganda and agenda. We've seen, in fact, the government surrendering to the diktats of the Khalistani elements.
The state has become weaker, has become more corrupted. These are opportunities created by chaos, by political vacuums. It is an articulation of grievances through radical platforms when traditional political platforms have failed.
Punjab is at a brink, Punjab is in a flux, and Punjab is at a crossroads. Now, which road will the Punjab government take is the biggest question. As of now, it's only worsening. it is only showcasing that the Punjab government is unable to deal with the Khalistani propagandists and the Khalistani violence in Punjab. On the other hand, the central government has taken some precautions and precautionary steps. You've seen UAPA being enforced against Khalistani elements, including the head of Sikhs for Justice, Gurpatjit Singh Pannu, and elements from Babbar Khalsa and other Sikh Khalistani terror organizations. Situation can go out of hand, and it will be a victory for the Pakistani deep state, where the K2 strategy will be not only implemented, but will be successful.
मैं इमरान अहमद खान नियाजी सबके दिल से हल्फ उठाता हूँ.
When Imran Khan came initially into politics, he thought his personal popularity would be sufficient for him. It didn't happen.
The retired military generals are openly saying that Imran